Dr. Fisher is a professor of educational leadership at San Diego State University and a leading voice in literacy, school leadership, and teacher clarity. He has also co-authored the book, The Teacher Clarity Playbook, and many other influential works. In this episode, we'll be exploring the sustainability of assessment practices in schools and how professional learning communities, or PLCs, can serve as powerful structures for collaboration and growth. Dr. Fisher shares his insights on how PLCs can foster collective responsibility, support meaningful assessment, and ultimately help us build stronger, more connected teams that support both student learning and teacher well-being. Let's dive into this rich and timely conversation. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Learning Curve podcast with Edmonton Catholic Schools. Today, we are thrilled to have Dr. Douglas Fisher with us. He is a professor of educational leadership at San Diego State University, where he focuses on policies and practices in literacy and school leadership. He has authored several books and articles, including the Teacher Clarity Playbook, alongside Nancy Frey, Olivia Amador, and Joseph Asoff. Welcome, Dr. Fisher.
Hello.
So we're going to just get started with quite an easy question. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what led you to pursue a career in education?
Sure. My mother was a library media aide, and my stepmother was a fourth grade teacher for 30-something years. So I always wanted to be in education. I love watching the learning process. So I went into several areas of education and worked in schools, taught, became an administrator, and then ended up at the university.
So for our audience who may not know of your work, can you provide us an overview of your area of expertise or what you're currently working on?
I really work on teaching and learning. What are the things educators do to have learning occur? So I'm interested in literacy because it transcends all subject areas. I'm interested in teacher collaboration. I'm interested in things like scaffolding and assessment and the idea of what can we do to maximize the learning that our students do.
Wonderful. So I think this is going to play really well into our episode today. So today we would like to focus on sustainability of assessment practices in schools. And one tool that we can use for that are professional learning communities. And it's my understanding that you've done some work and some research in this area. Can you define for us this structure for collaboration? What is a professional learning community?
Sure. A professional learning community is a group of adults that come together. They have the belief that together they can accomplish great things for students. They take collective responsibility for students' learning, not your students and my students, and we're going to compare who did, quote, better. We're talking about how do we together believe and enact practices to improve students' learning. It helps us think about our efficacy and our ability to impact learning. There's been a whole history of professional learning communities going back decades that talks about teacher isolation and how do we combat teacher isolation and share the amazing ideas that everyone has with one another so that together we have an amazing impact on our students.
Yeah, I like what you said there with together we have this belief that all of the students are shared students within our building and building that culture of collaboration where we're all taking ownership over our students and over their learning within a school building. So there's so many different things we could talk about in a professional learning community. That can be from inclusive education to assessment to lesson planning and etc. But let's zone in on assessment practice. If that were the topic of a PLC that a school wanted to go along with, could you share your thoughts about how a professional learning community can enhance good assessment practice in a school?
Sure. One of the questions that we ask in our PLC Plus model is, what did we learn today? And that's our focus on assessment. What is it that we are learning about our students and about ourselves that help us improve? So that's our assessment question. In some cases, teachers use common formative assessments. That is, that everyone gives the same assessment and we bring all the results together. We do believe that's somewhat limiting, that there are other ways to collect evidence about students' learning and then process it as a group. That what happens sometimes with common formative assessments is people are afraid of it. They teach directly to it rather than teaching content so that the students look good or better, and it's kind of artificial. So we don't limit the assessment practices to common formative assessments. That's one tool we have. But we talk about what evidence do you need to bring to the meeting about your students' learning. It could be a writing sample. There's just so many things we could do. It can be observational data. It can be checklists. It can be work work on success criteria. There's all kinds of things we can bring to our meetings, our conversations, to talk about the impact we're having. See, in my world, teachers don't have to work only in PLCs with people who teach the same thing. That just hasn't worked out very well. Maybe in elementary school, it's easy to say, you're a third grade teacher on the third grade team, but there are some things that we should look at vertical alignment. So we talk about assessment. What does it look like in third grade versus fourth grade versus fifth grade? And if you have a vertical team meeting and you're starting to say, oh, this is how we're going to assess it, so we know next year what they need to learn, and we're not being redundant with what we're teaching and learning, and we're not having gaps in what we're teaching and having students learn. Sorry. And so I think there's all kinds of tools. Now, in middle schools and high schools, you often end up with singletons, people teaching, the only one teaching something, and you end up with teachers who have multiple classes they teach. And so if you're teaching world history and you're teaching civics or something like that, you're teaching algebra 1 and geometry, which meeting do you go to? So what happens is you pick one team to join and the other doesn't really get enough attention, or the others. So when we started talking about this, there are many ways to group teachers to increase their effect. Cross departments can work. Cross course can work. Similar course can work. There's all kinds of groupings, but the fact, no matter what, when you group teachers, we have to decide on what data we're going to bring together. So for example, let's say we're talking about a team that has science, social studies, and English language arts teachers on it. And they are working on claim evidence reasoning papers, how students learn to make a claim, provide evidence for that claim. And they want to assess that. Maybe they assess, do students have basic knowledge? They want to have some short answer, constructed response, even some multiple choice items to say, do students have basic understanding of what it means to have a claim evidence reasoning? And then when they check in with students on that, they can say, okay, now we're ready to have them write some. So we're going to work on claims. These are the indicators that the claims are effective. This is what I'm assessing. So then across science and history and English language arts, they're looking at students' writing to see the quality of the claims. And over time, they move into evidence and reasoning, and then they have them writing entire papers, and they bring those together to look at the quality of the product, the writing. So that's how I think data or evidence and assessment fit into these team meetings.
Thank you. I'm loving this idea, just making it clear that a professional learning community doesn't have to be same grade level, same subject area. That just won't work in a lot of our school settings. And how can we be creative in our groupings to provide that holistic programming to our students? And I think it also goes back to what you were saying before about a true professional learning community is where teachers believe that they have this shared responsibility over students. And that spans across subject areas, even if you're not responsible for teaching a certain subject. So I guess I'm with this creative grouping idea. What advice would you have for schools wanting to start? Where would they start in establishing PLCs?
Shirley Hord put up some conditions of quality PLCs, and I would start with her work way back and saying things like, do they have a structure? Do they have a culture of peers helping peers? What's the leadership of the team? We call them activators, someone to activate the work of other adults. So there are some indicators. And then what we do, we ask teams to start looking at these indicators and assessing themselves. Where are you at with these indicators? And what do you need to work on to make your team highly efficient and effective in doing its work? So we start off with Shirley Hord's indicators. We go through some self-assessment work. The next thing we do is we start setting some norms. Now, lots of teachers and lots of teams and lots of groups have set norms. They tend to set operating norms, and some of them are very vague, like arrive on time or don't be on your devices, or, they just like these statements. We also need process norms. How will this team work? What is it that we do when we bring evidence or data or assessments to the table? What do we do? There's all these protocols that we work on, and the teams have to have both operating norms and process norms so they know how they're going to work together. They also need a goal or a challenge. What is it we're taking on? So in my example of a mix of grade 3, 4, 5, let's say primary grades. Let's take that. So let's say there's a group of primary grade teachers and they're working on foundational reading skills. What is the goal that they're working toward that they want to accomplish as a team? When they have their assessment of their abilities as a team to work together, and they have operating and process norms and protocols, and they have a goal, they are way more likely to be effective. When we all have we call that a common challenge. When we have a challenge that we want to accomplish together, and we have ways of collecting evidence that we're making progress towards that, it helps the team stay focused, and it's very reinforcing. It feels good to start saying, oh, look, 3 weeks in, we've made some progress. 4 weeks in, 5 weeks in, we're making progress towards the goal that we want to accomplish.
Wonderful. So I think a question that I get often when I'm talking about PLCs to principals and other teachers is, how do I reconceptualize time? How do I create time for this to happen? Because I think time is quite limited in education, but if we make this a focus, we can definitely carve out that time and build it. So what would be your recommendations for amount of time or different frameworks around making time for teachers here?
Yeah. That is one of the conditions that Shirley Hoare talks about in terms of structure is, do you have the time and do you have dedicated time and places for people to meet where they know this is our cadence of how we're going to do our work together? Time gets used in a bunch of different ways in schools. We have hours of professional development, hours of, lots of staff meetings and things like that. And I think a creative leadership team says, what is the time we have? What is the best use of that time? And if they believe that PLCs and professional learning community plus models are a good use of time, they will start allocating more time to that. Teachers still need to learn things and we still have to have staff meetings. But what if we made the professional learning part of our professional learning communities? That there were times where we learned in our teams and the learning we did was going to help us accomplish the goals that we have as a team. That would allocate more time. The reality is we probably get about an hour a week of time with our teams to do this work. Some teams also meet virtually because they find such value in the time they have together. So they will say, like, we're going to meet on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And then we're going to check in with each other on Monday afternoons, but like on a Zoom call or on a FaceTime. We've seen teams do that. And because they want to do a check-in and say, like, how's this going with you? How's this going with you? So people come up with different solutions. And I'm not asking teachers to do a whole bunch of extra time. It's if you're going to design learning experiences, if you're going to design assessments and you can get 15 minutes with your colleagues, you're probably going to be more efficient with.
Yeah, I think what I heard in that answer is it's going to be very context dependent. It's going to be, what does your school look like? But also, what does each team look like and what are the needs of each team? So there's not really a one size fits all when it comes to time, but if we can be these flexible and responsive leaders in carving out that time for our teachers, and we can make it a priority in our school buildings.
Yes, I agree.
So I think my next question is sustainability in regards to PLCs. So in education over the past few years, we've been seeing higher turnover rates in teachers, either switching from grade levels, switching from schools, or completely leaving the profession. So what would be some markers or some advice to make PLCs sustainable over time?
I think I'll frame it a little bit differently. When teachers are part of highly productive teams, they are less likely to leave. When you feel like you belong, that you are contributing to the team, when this is valued to you and it helps you accomplish the work that you're doing, then you are more likely to stay on the team. And that can be super helpful in protecting teachers and protecting their group identity. So that's part of my answer, is that how do we create highly effective teams so that the teachers know, I need to be here, I get value here, it makes my work more manageable because I'm part of this team. Does that make sense? I mean, that's how I think about it. It's when people feel really good about their teams. I belong here, I contribute, I have things to offer. Why would I want to leave? Now, there are people who are going to leave. There's a natural attrition to teaching. But I think right now, people are feeling pretty stressed about it and not feeling very effective. And if you don't feel effective, then you're probably going to be questioning whether or not this is the right job for you.
Yeah. And you were talking about earlier with the different markers of PLCs. Within a PLC, you'll need somebody to take that lead and to help build that culture within the PLC. If I were a principal of a school, would that need to be me?
No, we talk about activators as people, usually teachers, although it could be a leader, who has specialized training in supporting adults. So how do you have strong facilitation skills? Do you have strong organizational skills? Do you know how to deal with difficult people? Do you know how to redirect a conversation when it starts to wander? There's a set of skills that we call activators, and we see mostly teachers doing this work, activating the work of others. In the ideal state, everyone knows how to activate and they rotate the role meeting to meeting. And like, this is my meeting. Here's what we're going to be accomplishing today. Next week might be yours. This is what you're going to accomplish in your meeting. That's the ideal state. Now, some teams only have one activator. It's a dangerous model to say the administrators have to be managing professional learning communities. That means you have to be attending them all and then, like focusing on them and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it might become a compliance issue. And that's not what we're looking for. We want to trust teachers that you have time to meet, that you will accomplish great things, that you find value in coming together with your team because it makes the work manageable and it allows you to collaborate and see the effect you're having on students. So when we do that, and when we see that, the activators grow, they have bigger impact, they feel valued, they contribute. That part of collective responsibility, this mindset of collective responsibility in the research is that every teacher impacts all of the students, even students that are not on their rosters. So our highly strong, highly effective teachers have an impact on lots more learners than they will ever have in their own classrooms. And that's what feels powerful. You're an activator and you're bringing ideas to the table and you're helping people make sense of the data and it's impacting your classroom and you're impacting their classroom. That feels great. That's why we got into this. We want to see learning. And yes, we want to see our students learning, but it also is rewarding to watch your colleagues continue to grow.
I love that. Our goal here as leaders in the building is to trust teachers. And what better way to honor teacher efficacy and to honor teacher collective efficacy if we're truly trusting them to run their PLCs for what they need in their classroom and what they need in their practice. So I think something that might leave a principal a bit more uncomfortable is how do you monitor if PLC time is being used effectively? How would I know what's happening in the PLC if I don't have to be at each one?
Well, first of all, there's a level of trust. Teachers are professionals. Second, we should be looking at the outcome or the impact. As they collect evidence, assessment data, what's changing? What's different? What are we seeing as the impact of that? And there's nothing that says principals can't walk in and out of teacher team meeting times as part of a PLC. Principals have ideas to contribute as well. They just don't have to manage them. But often, there are principals out there who have a lot of experience, who understand teaching and learning, and they can contribute to the group like everybody else. They can help interpret data. But the overall impact is, are we seeing changes in teacher practice and then student learning? Because that's what the original vision of a PLC was, to remove isolation and help the teachers learn so that students would learn. In a lot of PLC models, we forgot about the teacher learning part. The PLC is about people, grown-ups, learning things so they can improve the impact of their students. And so PLC time has to be, are people learning? And principals can notice that when they make their observations in classrooms. If your team is talking about this, am I seeing it? When I come in your classroom, am I seeing the results of the team meeting? You all decided that you were going to work on claim evidence, reasoning, writing, and I watched this lesson and I watched your students really start to understand what evidence means and how to collect the evidence and how to write about the evidence and produce the evidence. Well, that's an impact of your team. And I should feel good about that as your leader because I didn't have to micromanage. I didn't have to direct. I watched the team take on responsibility.
It's an interesting perspective to take towards leadership, where I know in our school board, we often have to create these school goals and these school plans, and we co-construct them with teachers. But what an interesting way to approach that. If we create those school goals open-ended so that teachers have space to pursue what they need in their PLC time, and then we become this facilitator. We're facilitating through carving out time for our teachers. We're facilitating through observing teachers, through talking with them, and making ourselves available to them as a resource rather than as a manager.
Right.
Well, I think we're coming to the end of the episode. Is there anything else you'd like to share on professional learning communities that we haven't touched upon?
Sure. I just have this thing that's been on my mind. In most PLC models, the question they ask is, what do you want students to learn? And that comes from a time before there were standards in provinces and states and countries. And at the time, if you flash back, there were no expectations. There were no standards. So fourth grade, this teacher is teaching this teacher is teaching this. So you could never have a conversation. So the original goal was, let's come together and say, what do we want students to learn? Fast forward, we have standards now. We have expectations in subject areas and grade levels of what kids will learn. And there was a whole movement around creating standards, articulating what, scope and sequence. standards of what students would learn to be able to do. So it's no longer relevant to talk about what you want students to learn because the government has already told us. So I find it a waste of time to spend on my energy on what do you want students to learn. It's not up for debate. It's not a great conversation. So we have to update those models. So we talk about where are we going in our learning journey because here are the standards. Where are we going next? Which helps us analyze the standards, figure out the clarity of those standards. How do we communicate to students what they're going to learn, what successful learning looks like? That is different than a team. And I've been to teams when I go to other schools and visit outside of my community where they literally talk about what they want students to learn and they make decisions like, we're not going to have them learn this, we're not going to have them learn this. Well, you're deciding they're not having access to grade level expectation. And you were allowed to do that in your professional learning community. And I think that's dangerous in terms of how we convey expectations and how we hold ourselves accountable for the content that we are tasked with teaching. So I like the update to say, where are we going in our learning journey? Let's look at the standards and let's figure out how to analyze those standards for a scope and sequence, a plan, how many days, what's going to happen each day of learning. That's why we connect learning communities, professional learning communities with our teacher clarity work, because that first question is really about teacher clarity, how you build that clarity for yourself and for students.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. So just to recap, where are we going? What are the standards, or in Alberta, we call them outcomes? What are they? What did the government detail? And then how are we going to know if we've been effective in teaching that? So what's our plan for teaching it and how are we going to analyze the data? What data and then what data and how are we going to analyze the data? All right. Well, are there any projects or initiatives or further learning that you have out there that you would like to share with teachers?
This is our newest project. I'm super excited about it. It's called Welcome to Teaching, and it's an illustrated guide to how teaching works. And I'm super happy with this nationally board certified teacher. So like the top teacher in the United States, Terrell Hansen, who does all of this art, illustrated this book. And it's got sections on assessment, and it's got sections on instruction, and it got sections on creating the climate of the classroom. I am super happy with this project now. It just came out around Welcome to Teaching, and like, what do we know? But it's an illustrated guide. So there's all kinds of images and pictures from Terrell Hansen. So that's my current passion, is around making information research super accessible to people, because we are busy, we don't have a lot of time, and we need to get into translation. What does the evidence say that I can use now in my classroom?
Thank you so much for sharing that. We have beginning teacher working groups within our school board, and that would be a resource that would be a very good one for us to use. So for any teacher beginning or middle of career, end of career who's interested in this book, I'll link it in the description so that you'll be able to find it on your.
Thank you.
The very last question is quite a big question, so take it where you would like to. But what is a dream that you have for education?
I want teachers to feel the impact of their work. I want teachers to know you're amazing, you do great things, and the kids will come back and they will remember you because of the impact you had. We work in an amazing profession. We have impact on thousands of lives, and we need to be comfortable taking some of the credit for the development of young people. I think right now a lot of people are deflecting and frustrated. We do amazing work. We help other people's children grow up and become amazing people in their own rights. And we need to recognize the impact we have.
Wonderful. What an amazing dream. Teachers are wonderful and we are doing great work. So thank you to all teachers listening, all educators listening, for all the work that you do. Well, thank you again, Dr. Fisher. It was a wonderful conversation and it's much appreciated.
I appreciate you. Thanks for the invitation. Bye, everybody.
As we wrap up this episode of The Learning Curve, we want to extend our deepest thanks to Dr. Douglas Fisher for sharing his wisdom and experience with us. Today's conversation reminded us that professional learning communities are more than just a structure. They're a mindset. When educators come together with a shared purpose, a belief in collective efficacy, and a commitment to meaningful assessment, we create the conditions for both student success and teacher sustainability. Whether you're part of a well-established PLC or just beginning the journey, may this episode inspire you to reflect, collaborate, and continue building strong, supportive teams in your school community. Thank you for joining us today. If you found this episode helpful, we invite you to share it with a colleague, subscribe to the podcast, and continue the conversation in your own learning spaces. Until next time, may your work be guided by clarity, sustained by community, and rooted in hope.